The Mediterranean dawn was the colour of a dying rose when they found him. Giovanni De Luca, old Netto to the villagers, lay on his back in the belly of his blue fishing boat, eyes wide to the sky, mouth frozen in a silent salt water. Should have filled those ancient lungs. It did not. Fresh water did. And on the Amalfi coast, where every drop that falls from the cliffs is salted by the breath of the sea, fresh water is the rarest thing of all. Chapter 1. The Little Belgian Arrives. The first light of an April morning in 1936 crept over the Latari Mountains like a hesitant thief, touching the terraced gardens of Ravello with fingers of rose and gold. Far below, the Tyrrhenian Sea lay so still that the fishing boats seemed painted upon a mirror. In the Grand Hotel Vittoria, perched upon its impossible cliff, the scent of espresso and warm cornetti drifted across the terrazzo, mingling with the heavier perfume of lemon blossoms that clung to the air like a promise never quite fulfilled. It was upon this terrace, beneath an arbour heavy with wisteria, the colour of imperial purple, that Hercule Poirot sat, immaculate in a light dove-grey suit, a cup of café Coretto balanced delicately between gloved fingers. His moustaches, those magnificent works of art, were waxed to symmetrical perfection. His green eyes, bright as the sea glass washed up on the beach at Satara, surveyed the scene with mild benevolence that concealed a mind already turning like the finest Swiss watch. A telegram had arrived the previous evening, delivered by a boy whose legs trembled from the ascent of 1,000 steps. The paper was cheap, the typing impatient, but the words had been sufficient. Come at once, stop drowning that is not drowning. Stop local police baffled, stop Rossi, Prefettura, Napoli. Poirot disliked haste. He disliked even more the disarrangement of natural laws. A drowning in salt water that was not salt water. It offended the orderliness of the universe, and Hercule Poirot, as the world well knew, could not abide offence. Thus he had come, travelling by night train from Rome, then by motor car along the terrifying Cornish road where the cliffs fell sheer into sapphire nothingness. He had arrived at dawn, taken a suite overlooking the infinite sea, ordered breakfast, and now he waited. He did not wait long. A man approached across the terrazzo with the rolling gait of one more accustomed to decks than marble. His uniform was dark blue, the gold braids somewhat tarnished, the peaked cap clutched in nervous hands. His moustache drooped like a morning willow. His eyes were the washed-out brown of cheap Chianti. "Signor Poirot?" he asked, though the question was unnecessary. The little Belgian was unmistakable. "Capitano Alfredo Rossi, Questura di Amalfi, at your service." Poirot inclined his head with exquisite courtesy. "Enchanté, Capitano. You will take some coffee? The anisette here is tolerable." Rossi sat heavily. "Grazie, no, I have not slept. The whole coast is agitato. Old Netto dead, murdered, and in such a way." He crossed himself, though whether from piety or superstition Poirot could not tell. "Commence at the commencement," Poirot said gently, setting down his cup. "Who precisely is this old Netto of whom the entire coast speaks in whispers?" "Giovanni De Luca," Rossi replied. Everyone called him Netto, because as a young man he could mend a net faster than any 10 fishermen. 72 years old now, or would have been next month. Rich for a fisherman. Owned 3 boats, the big villa above Atrani, vineyards on the hillside. Respected, beloved even, and yet... He spread his hands in a gesture of Mediterranean despair. "Yet he is dead," Poirot finished. "Tell me of the discovery." Rossi's voice dropped. "Yesterday at dawn, the baker, Matteo Russo, goes early to the marina to collect squid for his wife's Nero di Seppia. He sees La Sirena Azzurra, Netto's favourite boat, drifting just beyond the breakwater. Unusual. Netto always ties her with 3 knots. Always. Matteo rows out. He finds, Dio mio! The Capitano's eyes flicked to the religious medallion at his throat. Netto is lying on his back in the bottom of the boat, arms spread like the Cristo, eyes open, mouth open, dead. Everyone assumes heart attack, accident, the usual tragedy of old men and the sea. But when we lift the body, he swallowed, the lungs, signor, full of water, fresh water, not a trace of salt. The medico from Salerno confirms it this morning. Fresh water in a drowning at sea. It is impossible. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Impossible only to those who accept the surface of things, mon capitaine. Continue. We search the boat. Nothing. No struggle. The oars shipped neatly, the nets coiled. Only one thing strange. A faint smell, like the mountain springs above Scala. You know the Valle del Ferrier. There the water runs pure, cold, full of ferns and ruins of old paper mills. That smell, in a fishing boat. Poirot leant forward, the morning light catching the emerald in his tie-pin. And the widow? This Signora De Luca? Rossi's face darkened. Lucia, bellissima ancora. 42 years, not a grey hair. She came to the marina when we brought the body ashore. Dressed already in black, you understand? As though she knew. She wept, certainly, but I'm a policeman 25 years. I have seen widows who tear their hair, and widows whose eyes remain dry beneath the tears. Signora Lucia's eyes were dry. Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. Interesting. And the heirs, the enemies? One does not reach 72 years, and great wealth upon this coast without accumulating both. Rossi counted on thick fingers. First, the wife, Lucia. Married 30 years, no children, she inherits everything naturally. Second, Enzo Moretti, called Il Lupo. Once Netto's partner in the fishing, and it is whispered in other things during the hard years after the Great War. They say Netto cheated him of a fortune. Enzo has the strength of 3 men and the temper of the devil. Third, an Englishman, Dr. Tristan Hale, who arrived 6 months ago to study Roman remains beneath the waves. He has been seen often with the Signora. Too often, some say. Fourth, the English secretary of Dr. Hale, a cold one, Signorina Daphne Vale. Blonde as the corn, eyes like winter. She watches everything, and then there are old stories, smuggling stories, Roman gold. But that is legend, no? Poirot's smile was thin. Legends, Capitano, are merely truths that have not yet been proved inconvenient. Take me to the boat. They descended the famous 1,000 steps from Ravello to the sea. Rossi puffing like a steam launch. Poirot descending with the neat precision of a man who considers each footfall a small triumph of civilization over gravity. At the marina of Amalfi, gulls wheeled and screamed above forests of masts. Fishermen in wool caps watched the strangers with the ancient suspicion of coastal people for anyone who wore leather shoes. La Sirena Azzurra rocked gently at her mooring, newly painted in that particular blue the Amalfitani believe brings luck. She was perhaps 7 meters, broad in the beam, with a lateen sail furled like a sleeping swan. A carabinieri in white gloves stood guard. Poirot stepped aboard with the delicacy of a cat entering unfamiliar territory. He inhaled. Yes, there it was, beneath the honest sense of tar, salt, and drying octopus. Something pure, mineral, impossibly clean, the scent of the high mountains carried to the sea in a murderer's demijohn. He knelt, gloved fingers tracing the planks where the body had lain. A faint, darker stain, already fading under the sun. He touched it to his tongue, the tiniest amount, and his eyebrows rose. Acqua di fonte, he murmured. from the spring the ancients called Aquaferiensis, rich in iron and secrets. Someone carried death in a glass carboy, Capitano, 20 litres, perhaps 30, enough to drown a man who trusted his killer. Rossi crossed himself again. Poirot stood, eyes sweeping the deck. In one corner, almost invisible, a single thread of black silk caught on a splinter. Morning silk. He plucked it free, held it to the light, and this, I think, did not belong to old Netto. Far above them, on the road that clung to the cliff like a lizard, a woman in black watched through opera glasses. Even at this distance, the quality of her stillness was absolute. Poirot raised his hat to her with exquisite politeness. The game, as he liked to say, had begun. Chapter 2. The five who stood to gain the Villa Simbrone. At twilight is a place where the world seems to forget its proper dimensions. Its gardens hang between sky and sea like the private dream of a Renaissance prince. And on this particular evening, in April 1936, the air was heavy with the scent of datura, jasmine, and something darker, something that Poirot's sensitive nose identified at once as fear. A table of pale travertine had been set upon the terrace of infinity. That astonishing belvedere, where the balustrade is lined with marble busts of forgotten Roman emperors staring eternally out over the Gulf of Salerno. Torches of pine and rosemary flared in iron cressets, their smoke curled upward like incense offered to the coming night. 5 chairs waited. 5 glasses of Falangina trembled in the small wind that always rises when the sun dies behind Capri. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, small, immaculate, deadly. He had dismissed Capitano Rossi with a courteous gesture that was, in truth, a command. Tonight he required no chorus of carabinieri clattering like kitchen pans. Tonight the little Belgian wished the suspects to feel themselves alone upon the edge of the world, with only the gods and Hercule Poirot to judge them. They arrived one by one, as though summoned by some invisible stage manager. First came Signora Lucia de Luca, descending the cypress-lined avenue in a rustle of bombazine and black lace, so fine it might have been woven by the spiders of morning. The veil she wore was pinned back now, revealing a face still beautiful, in the way that certain statues remain beautiful long after the temple has fallen, cold, perfect, and faintly cruel. Her eyes were the colour of wet violets, and they did not lower when they met Poirot's. "Signor Poirot," she said, voice low, husky with unshed grief, or perhaps with the cigarettes she smoked through a holder of onyx and gold. "You honour the house of the dead with your presence." "Madame," Poirot replied, bowing over her gloved hand without quite touching it, "it is death itself that honours us tonight, by inviting us to understand its intentions." Next, heavy footsteps upon the gravel announced Enzo Moretti, Il Lupo. The fisherman filled the entrance to the terrace like a brigand from a Verdi opera. His jersey was the dark blue of midnight, his neck scorched by 35 years of salt and sun. A gold hoop glinted in one ear. His black eyes moved continually, as though searching the shadows for enemies. When he saw Lucia, something savage flickered across his face and was gone. "Belgian!" he growled, the word an insult in itself. "I come because the widow asked it, not for you." Poirot's smile was seraphic. "Naturally, monsieur. One attends the funerals of one's enemies out of respect. One attends their inquests out of curiosity." Enzo's fists opened and closed like the claws of a lobster. He took the chair farthest from Lucia, yet his gaze never left her. Then came the English, always punctual, even when summoned to a confession. Dr. Tristan Hale strode onto the terrace in white linen that had somehow remained immaculate despite a day spent in sea caves. His hair was the colour of ripe wheat, his eyes the pale blue of a man who has stared too long at horizons. He carried a Malacca cane with a jade handle, and he used it now to salute Poirot with ironic elegance. Monsieur Poirot, I had heard the continent's most fastidious detective was holidaying on our little coast. I did not expect to find myself upon your stage. Your presence, Doctor, Poirot replied, is less surprising than you imagine. Treasure hunters are drawn to gold as inevitably as moths to a candle. Sometimes they burn. Hale laughed, a sound like ice cracking in a glass, and took his seat. Last of the lay guests and moving with the silence of a woman who has long ago learned the value of being unnoticed, came Miss Daphne Vale. She wore a simple dinner dress of ice-green silk that made her look like a blade dipped in moonlight. Her hair was pinned severely, yet a single curl had escaped to lie against the alabaster column of her neck. She did not speak. She merely inclined her head, a movement so economical it conveyed everything and nothing, and sat at Hale's right hand like a secretary, like a bodyguard, like something else entirely. Poirot waited until the final torch had been lit and the servants dismissed. Far below, the lights of Amalfi began to prick the darkness like a handful of scattered diamonds. A nightingale began its liquid complaint somewhere in the temple of Bacchus. Mesdames, Messieurs, Poirot began, voice soft yet carrying to the very edge of the precipice. We are met tonight not to mourn Giovanni de Luca, for mourning is the privilege of the innocent, but to discover why a man who spent 72 years defying the sea was finally defeated, not by salt water, but by the pure water of the mountains that should never have touched his lips. He paused, the torches hissed. Lucia's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the stem of her glass. Capitano Rossi has informed you, I am certain, of the medical impossibility. The lungs of old Netto were filled with acqua di fonte, spring water from the Valle delle Ferriere to be precise. Yet his boat drifted in the salt sea. Someone, therefore, transported death in a container. Someone held an old man beneath that water until his struggles ceased. Someone then arranged the corpse with care, almost with tenderness, and set the boat adrift so that the tide would tell the wrong story. Enzo Moretti spat over the balustrade. Pretty words. You accuse us all, then? Accusations, Poirot said mildly, are the luxury of fools and policemen. I deal in facts, and the first fact is this. Giovanni de Luca was a smuggler. A collective intake of breath, quickly stifled. In 1922, Poirot continued, strolling behind the chairs like a lecturer who enjoys the discomfort of his students, a caïque out of Brindisi carrying 20 kilograms of late Roman gold, solidae of Honorius Theodosius Galla Placidia, vanished between Crete and Sicily. Everyone assumed shipwreck. Everyone was wrong. The gold reached this coast, in the hold of a fishing boat named La Sirena Azzurra, the same boat, messieurs dames, in which Giovanni died. Lucia's voice cut like a shard of crystal. Old stories, fishermen's tales to frighten children. Yet stories, Poirot replied, that explain why a simple fisherman owned a villa with frescoes by Galante and a wine cellar older than the Kingdom of Italy. Stories that explain why certain persons, his gaze lingered on Dr. Hale, have spent 6 months diving in caves that were thoroughly explored by the Regia Marina in 1916 and found to contain only octopi and disappointment. Hale raised an eyebrow. Academic interest, monsieur, nothing more. academic interest that purchases 25 litres of distilled water from the pharmacy in Scala 3 days before a man drowns in distilled water. Curious academia. Daphne Vale spoke for the first time, her voice cool as the wind off the snows of Monte Cervati. Coincidence. One must clean delicate artifacts. Poirot turned to her with genuine admiration. Mademoiselle, you lie with the perfection of a Bach fugue. It is a pleasure to listen. Enzo slammed a fist upon the table. Glasses jumped. Enough games. If you have proof, speak it. If not, let me go back to my boat and my nets. Poirot's eyes glittered. Proof, mon loup, is like the tide. It advances slowly, yet nothing resists it. But let us speak instead of motive. 20 kilograms of gold, even melted down, would fetch perhaps 2 million lire today. Enough to buy villas, vineyards, silence, or a new life in Argentina for those who fear the past. Lucia laughed, a low sound that might have been sorrow or contempt. My husband was 72. He had no need of new lives. Yet you, madame, at 42, have need of many things. A husband who threatens to give away the family fortune to a museum in Naples, for example. A husband who writes a new will, leaving everything to the church should he die without issue. A husband who, perhaps, has tired of a wife who entertains English archaeologists while he mends his nets. The silence that followed was so complete that the distant bark of a dog in Maori sounded like a gunshot. Lucia rose slowly. Black silk whispering, "You will regret those words, Monsieur Poirot." "Regret," Poirot said softly, "is for those who act too late. And now, mes amis, the night grows cold. I detain you no longer, but reflect upon this. Somewhere on this coast, 20 kilograms of imperial gold lie hidden, and somewhere, equally hidden, is a demijohn that still smells of mountain water and murder. One of you knows where both may be found." He bowed, exquisite, terrible, buona notte, and may your dreams be illuminating. They left separately. Enzo first, stamping like a bull, then Hale and Daphne together, murmuring in English too low to catch. Finally Lucia, pausing at the balustrade to stare out at the Black Sea, as though it might give Aisho up its secrets if stared at long enough. Poirot remained alone among the torches. He took from his pocket the thread of black silk mourning lace he had found in the boat and held it to the flame. It curled, blackened, and was gone. Far below, the sea hurled itself against the rocks with the sound of 1,000 lies breaking. The second act, Poirot thought with satisfaction, had begun perfectly. Chapter 3. The Widow's Tears That Never Fell. The Villa de Lucca crouched on its spur of rock above Atrani, like a black cat arching its back against the sky. Morning mist still clung to the bougainvillea when Poirot's hired Fiat Balilla growled up the tortuous lane, scattering chickens and old women in equal measure. The gates stood open, as though the house itself had been waiting. A maid in starched apron and frightened eyes admitted him to a salon that smelled of beeswax, dying roses, and the particular staleness that settles upon rooms where grief is being rehearsed rather than felt. Every mirror was veiled in black lace. Every clock had been stopped at 23 minutes past 4, the supposed hour of Giovanni's death. Theatrical, Poirot thought, but then widows on the Amalfi Coast have always understood spectacle. Signora Lucia received him in a smaller room that opened directly onto a terrace suspended above the void. She wore mourning of such severity that it became magnificent. A gown of crêpe de chine cut on the bias, a veil pinned back with a single brooch of Whitby jet, carved into the shape of a weeping Niobe. Only her hands moved, long, restless, olive-skinned fingers twisting a rosary of black Venetian beads. "Signor Poirot," she said, rising with the fluid grace of a woman who has never allowed sorrow to make her clumsy. "You come to torture a widow." "I come, madame, to liberate her from suspicion. The two are sometimes indistinguishable." He refused the offered chair, preferring to stand so that the light from the sea fell full upon her face. It was a beautiful face still, though the beauty now carried the faint bruise of sleepless nights, or perhaps of something colder. Lucia resumed her seat, arranging the folds of her skirt with the precision of a painter positioning drapery. "Ask what you must. My husband's soul cannot rest while wicked tongues wag." Poirot's gaze drifted to a silver-framed photograph on the pianoforte. Giovanni De Luca in his 50s, hawk-faced, eyes bright with the cunning of the coast. Beside him, a much younger Lucia, radiant in wedding satin, clutching a bouquet of orange blossom. 30 years separated the woman in the photograph from the woman before him, yet the smile had not changed. It was the smile of a woman who already knew she would win. "Signora," Poirot began gently, "your husband left the house at dusk on the 15th to fish for Totani, yes? Alone, as was his custom?" "Always alone. Giovanni said the sea spoke only to one man at a time." "And you remained here?" "I played patience until midnight. The maid Philomena will confirm it." Poirot inclined his head. "Naturellement. Yet, at 1:30 in the morning, the gardener, old Salvatore, saw a light moving in the cantina beneath the villa. A lantern. Someone was there for nearly an hour." Lucia's fingers stilled upon the rosary. "The cantina is full of wine and ghosts," she said. "Old men see many things after grappa." "Perhaps. Yet the following morning, the iron strongbox your husband kept chained to the wall was empty. It had contained, I am told, certain papers, and a small quantity of gold coins kept for emergencies. The chain was cut with bolt cutters. The empty box was then carried down the mule path to the sea." For the first time, Lucia's composure faltered. A pulse beat visibly at her throat. "You invent fairy tales." "No, madam, I invent nothing. I merely arrange the pieces you yourselves have scattered." Poirot removed from his waistcoat pocket a single gold coin, a solidus of Honorius, and laid it upon the table between them. The Emperor's profile gleamed malevolently in the sunlight. "This was prized from beneath a floorboard in the cantina yesterday. There is still mortar dust upon it. Someone searched in haste." Lucia stared at the coin as though it were a scorpion. "That coin could belong to anyone." "It bears the dent Giovanni made with his tooth when he tested it in 1922. Enzo Moretti described the mark to me this morning. Identical," the rosary snapped. Black beads scattered across the marble, like drops of dried blood. Lucia rose in a single motion, crossing to the balustrade. The wind lifted her veil. For an instant she looked impossibly young, almost the bride in the photograph. "My husband was going to give everything away," she said to the sea. "The gold, the villa, all of it to a museum in Naples so that Mussolini could claim credit for returning glory to Italy. 30 years I kept his house, warmed his bed, buried the stillborn children no one speaks of. And for what? So that fat bureaucrats could hang a plaque with his name." Her voice cracked, but still no tears came. Poirot spoke softly behind her. "So you decided he should die before the new will was signed?" She whirled. "I decided nothing. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I searched for the gold when I learned his intention, but I did not kill him." "Then who did, madame?" someone who knew the exact location of the spring above the Vallée de la Ferrière. Someone who could lure an old man to the cantina with a promise or a threat. Someone strong enough or clever enough to hold him beneath 20 litres of water until the struggle ended. Lucia's eyes blazed. "Find them, then! Hunt your monster, but leave me to my grief." Poirot bowed. "Grief, signora, is a luxury. Truth is a necessity." As he turned to leave, his eye was caught by something half-hidden beneath a cushion on the window seat, a corner of black lace torn and stained with what might have been water, or mud, or blood. He palmed it smoothly. At the door, he paused. "One last thing. Your perfume, madame. Jasmin et bergamote, yes. It lingers upon this scrap of veil I recovered from La Sirena Azura. Curious, for a woman who claims never to have approached her husband's boat after his death." Lucia stared at him for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, she smiled. "Find your killer, Monsieur Poirot. But remember, on this coast, even the sea lies." Outside, the Fiat's engine had cooled. When Poirot turned the starting handle, the brakes sighed like a dying man. A clean cut, almost surgical, severed the hydraulic line. He looked up toward the villa. A curtain moved, then was still. The widow's tears had not fallen, but her warning had been delivered. Chapter 4. The Wolf's Alibi. The house of Enzo Moretti squatted at the edge of the marina of Amalfi, like a bad-tempered dog chained too close to the water. It was built of rough tufa blocks blackened by centuries of salt, its door scarred by knives and weather in equal measure. Nets hung from the rafters like flayed skins, octopus dried on lines, their tentacles curled in permanent agony. The air stank of tar, garlic, and the sour sweat of a man who had not slept. Enzo was mending a trawl net when Poirot arrived, his thick fingers moving with surprising delicacy through the mesh. A bottle of grappa stood half-empty on the table, a crucifix of olive wood, and a photograph of a younger Enzo with Giovanni De Luca, both grinning, arms around each other's shoulders, were the only decorations. He did not rise. "So the little Belgian comes to the wolf's den," he said without looking up. "Sit if you want, or stand, I don't care." Poirot remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the room with the mild interest of a naturalist observing a dangerous species in its lair. "You hated Giovanni De Luca," Poirot began conversationally. Enzo's fingers paused. "I hated what he became. We were boys together. We stole our first gold coin together from a Turkish smuggler in 1919. We swore blood brotherhood. Then he married the beautiful Lucia and decided respectability suited him better than sharing. He knotted the mesh savagely. In 1922, we brought the 20 kilos ashore. Netto said the fascisti were watching, that we must wait. 10 years he waited, 20. Always another excuse. Then last year he tells me he will give it all to the state. My share too. My children's bread. His voice dropped to a growl. Yes, I hated him. Poirot moved closer, stepping carefully over coils of rope. Enough to kill him? Enzo looked up at last. His eyes were bloodshot but steady. I was in Salerno the night he died, drinking with 20 fishermen in a tavern near the docks. They will swear it on their mothers' graves. I took the last bus back at dawn and learned he was dead when the whole village was screaming. He reached for the grappa, drank from the bottle. Search if you like, you will find nothing. Poirot's gaze had already found something. Hanging from a nail behind the door was a blue wool fisherman's cap, salt-stained and frayed. A large cap, extra large. This is yours, I believe. Enzo shrugged. One of many. Yet this one was recovered yesterday morning floating beside La Sirena Azzurra. It carried your initials inside the band, EM, stitched by your sister Rosa for your Saint's Day. For the first time, Enzo looked uncertain. I lost a cap last week. Anyone could have taken it. Anyone, Poirot agreed, who wished the world to believe Il Lupo had finally torn out his old partner's throat. He produced a small evidence envelope, shook out a single strand of coarse black hair caught in the cap's lining. And this hair, monsieur, contains follicles. Modern science can match blood type. Should we send it to Rome? Enzo surged to his feet, towering over the little detective. The table overturned, the grappa bottle shattered. Listen, you perfumed dwarf! 2 carabinieri appeared as if by magic in the doorway. Poirot had not come entirely alone. Violence, Poirot said sadly, is the refuge of the innocent who fear, or the guilty who have no better argument. Enzo subsided, breathing like a blacksmith's bellows. I did not kill him, he repeated, quieter now. But if I had, I would have used a knife to the heart, not water like some cowardly woman. Poirot studied him for a long moment. I believe you, he said at last, surprising them both. But someone borrowed your hatred the way they borrowed your cap. Someone who knew the old stories would point directly to you. He turned to leave, then paused. One last thing. You were seen digging in the cemetery 3 nights ago, near the sarcophagus of the Roman centurion. Why? Enzo's face went grey beneath the tan. I was visiting my mother's grave. At 2 a.m, with a spade. The fisherman crossed himself, genuinely frightened now. There are things on this coast best left buried, signor. Some holes, once opened, cannot be closed again. Poirot nodded thoughtfully and stepped into the blinding noon light. Outside, the gulls screamed like women paid to mourn. As he walked away along the Lungomare, he noticed fresh earth beneath Enzo's fingernails, and a scrap of green tweed caught on the doorframe. Tweed the colour Dr. Tristan Hale favoured. The wolf, Poirot reflected, had been led very cleverly to the slaughterhouse gate, yet the knife remained in another hand entirely. And somewhere, beneath the cypresses of the old cemetery, or beneath the floors of the Villa de Lucca, 20 kilograms of imperial gold waited for someone brave enough, or desperate enough, to claim it. The little Belgian adjusted his hat against the sun and walked on, already hearing the next lie forming on the wind. Chapter 5. The Englishman and the Sunken Treasure. The sea caves beneath Ravello begin where the cliffs surrender to the water. Great cathedrals of limestone, hollowed by 10,000 years of waves. At dawn, they glow the colour of turquoise and blood, and the air inside is so cold it feels like breathing knives. It was here, in the largest cavern known locally as the Grotta dello Smeraldo, that Dr. Tristan Hale had established his archaeological base. Poirot arrived by motor launch at first light, the engine's throb echoing off the rock like distant artillery. Capitano Rossi had remained ashore. He turned green at the mere sight of a boat. So the little Belgian came alone, wrapped in a camel hair coat against the damp, his patent leather shoes absurdly out of place on the wet deck. A young diver in a rubber suit helped him across the rocking tender onto a floating platform lashed to iron rings driven into the living rock centuries ago by Bourbon engineers. Electric lamps hissed on pressure tanks. Their hard white light revealed a small empire of science. Crates of amphorae, measuring boards, a portable darkroom, and, most interesting of all, A row of gleaming brass diving helmets lined up like the heads of executed knights. Dr. Hale emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore khaki shorts and an open-necked shirt. His legs were sunburned the colour of mahogany, his smile easy and predatory. Monsieur Poirot, I must say this is unexpected. Most civilians find the descent rather trying. I have descended into worse abysses than this, Doctor, Poirot replied, removing his hat and beating imaginary spray from it. The human heart, for example. Hale laughed, the sound bouncing off the vaulted roof. Come to admire my little Roman villa, then. 3rd century, splendid hypocaust system. The floor mosaics are exquisite. Dolphins, nereids, the usual Mediterranean erotica. He gestured grandly toward a section of the cavern where the water was unnaturally still, roped off with buoyed lines. Beneath the surface, ghostly walls and columns could be glimpsed, perfectly preserved by the cold, mineral-rich water. Poirot's gaze, however, had fixed upon something far more modern. A stack of large glass demijohns, each holding 25 litres, each carefully labelled in Hale's neat copper plate, distilled H2O for cleaning tesserae. 25 litres. Exactly the quantity required to drown a man of Giovanni de Luca's size. An unusual cleaning fluid for Roman mosaics, Poirot observed mildly. Hale's smile did not falter, but something shifted behind his eyes. Seawater is corrosive, monsieur. Salt eats gold leaf, you know. We use pure distilled water for the final rinse. Yet the pharmacy in Scala sold you mountain spring water, not distilled. There is a difference. One leaves traces of iron and chlorophyll. The other does not. Hale shrugged. Oh, pharmacist is old. He misunderstands. From the shadows at the rear of the platform stepped Daphne Vale. She wore a man's shirt knotted at the waist and canvas trousers rolled to the knee. Her feet were bare, the soles blackened with tar. In her right hand, she carried a heavy rubberized torch. In her left, almost casually, a small Beretta pistol. "Leaving so soon, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked in her cool, precise English. Poirot regarded the pistol without visible alarm. "Mademoiselle, you disappoint me. A lady should never handle firearms before breakfast. It is so vulgar." Daphne's lips curved, not quite a smile. "Some of us have not had the luxury of breakfast." Hale moved to a crate and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in wood shavings, lay a single gold solidus, identical to the one Poirot had shown Lucia. "Found yesterday," he said conversationally, "wedged between tesserae. Proof that the Emperor's payroll really did sink here. Imagine 20 kilograms, perhaps more. Enough to fund proper excavation for decades. Or to buy a new identity in Brazil," Poirot added softly. Hale's eyes narrowed. "You overreach, monsieur. I am a scholar. You are a thief, doctor. A thief who has spent 6 months seducing a lonely widow to learn the location of gold she herself could not find. A thief who supplied the water, mountain spring water carried by night along the path of the gods, to drown an old man who finally decided virtue was worth more than riches." The cavern seemed to contract around them. Water dripped with the slow regularity of a metronome. Daphne raised the pistol. "Step onto the diving platform, Monsieur Poirot. Slowly." Poirot did not move. "You will shoot me here, with the echo carrying to every boat between here and Capri." "No, mademoiselle. You are more subtle than that. An accident, perhaps. The great detective slips on wet rock, strikes his head, is swept out by the current. Most tragic." Hale took a step forward. "Actually," he said almost regretfully, "that was the plan." From the mouth of the cave came the sudden roar of an engine. A powerful carabinieri launch burst into the cavern, searchlight blazing. Rossi stood in the bow, waving his arms like a windmill. "Fermi tutti, in nome della legge." For one frozen second, the tableau held, Hale reaching for a dive knife, Daphne's pistol wavering, Poirot serene as a cathedral saint. Then Daphne did something entirely unexpected. She turned the beretta on Hale and thumbed back the hammer. "Drop it, Tristan," she said in perfect Italian. "The game is over." Hale stared at her, mouth working soundlessly. You're Special branch, attached to Scotland Yard," she finished. "We've been watching your little antiquities ring since Alexandria. Giovanni De Luca was going to testify. You murdered him before he could." Hale's face twisted into something feral. "You lying!" he lunged. Daphne fired once. The bullet shattered a pressure lamp. Burning petrol hissed across the water. Hale vanished over the edge with a scream that was cut short by the sea. When the smoke cleared, Daphne Vale was already holstering the pistol beneath her shirt. "My real name is Inspector Vale," she told Poirot. "I'm sorry for the theatrics, but we needed him to incriminate himself." Poirot adjusted his tie, unruffled. "And the mountain water?" "Hale bought it. I followed him twice, but he didn't act alone. Someone on shore helped carry the demijohns. Someone who knew exactly where Giovanni would be that night." She looked toward the cave mouth, where the sun now poured in like molten gold. "Find that person, Monsieur Poirot. I rather think you already know who it is." Poirot inclined his head. "Mais oui, Inspector. The English are admirable. But even you cannot arrest a widow for tears she has not yet shed." He stepped back into the launch, coat flaring like a raven's wing. As the boat sped toward the open sea, he permitted himself the smallest of smiles. The wolf had been clever. The Englishman had been greedy. But the spider at the center of the web was still spinning. Chapter 6. The priest hears too much. The church of San Pancrazio clings to the highest ridge of Atrani, like a swallow's nest made of stone and centuries of guilt. At 4 o'clock on an April afternoon, the light slants through the rose window and turns the dust in the air into slow-moving gold. The scent inside is always the same: cold stone, candle smoke, and the faint sweetness of decaying lilies left too long before the Madonna. Padre Matteo was waiting in the side chapel of Sant'Anna, kneeling on the worn prie-dieu, though his knees had troubled him since the war. He was 81, thin as a heron, with eyes the colour of river pebbles after rain. When Poirot entered, the old priest did not rise at once. He finished his Ave, kissed the worn wooden beads, then stood with the careful dignity of a man who has carried too many coffins. "Signor Poirot," he said, voice soft but steady, "I wondered when you would come. You knew I would. Confession is a river, my son. Everything flows toward it in the end." He led Poirot not to the ornate Baroque confessional, but to the sacristy, a small room smelling of incense and old vestments. A single oil lamp burned before a painted wooden pietà, whose colours had been kissed away by generations of lips. Padre Matteo closed the door and leaned against it as though to keep the world out a little longer. "I cannot break the seal," he began at once. "You know that. I know the law of God, Padre. I ask only for the law of man." The priest's fingers worried the silver crucifix at his breast. "Then ask. On the night Giovanni De Luca died, did someone enter this church after the Angelus?" A long silence. Somewhere water dripped in the cistern beneath the floor. "Yes," the priest said finally. "A woman, veiled. She lit a candle before San Gennaro, patron against sudden death, then went to the baptistry." Poirot's eyes gleamed, and stayed long. Long enough for the candle to burn halfway. The baptistry of San Pancrazio is ancient, octagonal, carved from a single block of Carrara marble, brought here when the Amalfitani still feared Saracen raids. The font is deep enough for total immersion of adults, deep enough, Poirot noted as he examined it now, to drown a man if two strong people held him under. The water had been changed recently. The surface was unnaturally clear. And at the bottom lay a single gold coin, deliberately placed, the Emperor's face staring upward like a drowned soul. Poirot lifted it with a handkerchief. Another solidus of Honorius. The same dent from Giovanni's tooth. "She left this?" he asked. Padre Matteo crossed himself. "I found it at dawn, after the body was discovered. I thought it was Giovanni's last gift to the church, a penance." "Or a signature," Poirot murmured. He bent closer. Faint green stains clung to the marble rim, chlorophyll from the ferns of the Val del Ferrière, and caught on a carved acanthus leaf, a strand of black lace, torn, still damp when the priest found it. Poirot straightened. "Tell me, Padre, did Giovanni himself ever confess the location of the gold?" The old man's face crumpled. "Many times he wished to. Many times I begged him. He said the secret would die with him, that it was cursed. But 3 weeks ago, he came at night, drunk with grappa and fear. He told me he had written a letter to the museum in Naples. He would reveal everything, give everything. He said, 'Padre, I am tired of being afraid.'" Poirot's voice was gentle. "And you told someone?" The priest's eyes filled. "I am old. I am weak. She came to me the next day, weeping. Lucia. She has been my spiritual daughter since she was 16. She begged to know what Giovanni planned. I told her only that he wished to make restitution. Nothing more. May God forgive me." "God forgives," Poirot said dryly. "Hercule Poirot is less accommodating." He placed a hand on the priest's shoulder. "One last thing. The night of the murder, after the woman left, did anyone else come?" The priest hesitated. "A man, English accent. He did not enter the church. He waited outside, smoking. When the woman came out, they spoke in whispers. Then they walked together toward the path that leads to the Valle del Ferrière. Dr. Tristan Hale, Poirot thought. The circle closes." He turned to leave, then paused. "You will not be called to testify, Padre. Some sins belong only between a man and his God." Outside, dusk had fallen. The bells began to ring for vespers, slow and mournful. Poirot stood on the church steps and looked down at the village lights glimmering like false stars. The baptismal font had been the How, perfect vessel, holy water replaced by mountain spring, a murder committed beneath the sorrowful gaze of the Madonna. Then the body carried to the boat so the sea could lie for the killer. Lucia had planned it with care. Hale had supplied the water and the strength. Enzo's cap and ancient grudge provided the misdirection. Even Daphne Vale, or Inspector Vale, had been watching the wrong criminal. But one detail still nagged at the little Belgian. Why had Lucia left the gold coin in the font? A taunt? A penance? Or a message? Poirot slipped the coin into his pocket beside its twin. The priest's final words followed him down the steps into the gathering dark. "Be careful, my son. On this coast, even the saints have learned to lie." Chapter 7. The Tide Brings a Body's Secret. The mortuary of the Ospedale Civile in Salerno is a place that even the bright Campanian sun cannot warm. It lies beneath the old Aragonese fortress, its vaults echoing with the perpetual drip of condensation and the low hum of electric refrigerators. At 9 o'clock on a morning still raw with mist, Hercule Poirot entered escorted by a nervous young orderly who kept crossing himself as though death were contagious. Dr. Alfonso Caruso, the pathologist seconded from the University of Naples, awaited him beside a steel table, draped in a rubberized sheet. Caruso was a thin, precise man, with a moustache waxed to sabre points, and the weary eyes of one who has seen too many autopsies of men who believed the sea would always give them back. "Buongiorno, Signor Poirot. You wish to be present for the supplementary examination?" "I wish," Poirot replied, "to hear the sea confess what it tried to hide." Caruso gave a short, humorless laugh and drew back the sheet. Giovanni de Luca lay as though merely asleep, the skin waxy, the lips faintly blue. Only the Y incision hidden beneath a fresh dressing, and the terrible stillness betrayed the truth. "Primary findings you already know," Caruso began, voice clipped. "Death by drowning in fresh water. Pulmonary edema, froth in the airways, no salt crystals in the lungs. But there were anomalies." He lifted the left arm. "Bruising encircled both wrists in perfect ovals, thumb marks anterior, fingers posterior. Restraint. The victim was held from behind, arms pinned, then the head forced under. The hyoid bone is intact, no strangulation, but there are petechiae in the conjunctivae and classic signs of forceful immersion." Poirot leant closer, eyes glittering. "And the hands, dottore?" Caruso hesitated, then gently prized open the corpse's right fist. The fingers had been clenched so tightly in rigour that they required force to straighten. In the palm lay a scrap of black lace, sodden and torn, the edge embroidered with tiny seed pearls. "Found in situ," Caruso said quietly. "He tore it from his attacker in the final struggle. It was clenched so hard, the pearls left indentations in the flesh." Poirot took the lace with tweezers, held it to the light. The weave was unmistakable, handmade Venetian point, the same as Lucia de Luca's mourning veil. A single long dark hair adhered to it, caught in the torn threads. "And there is more," Caruso continued. He opened Giovanni's mouth with a spreader. The tongue was swollen, but on its upper surface faint green flecks clung. "Chlorophyll," the doctor confirmed, "from the microscopic algae that grow only in the springs of the Valle del Ferriere. Your killer used water straight from the source, not even filtered." Poirot straightened, mind racing. "One final indignity, if you please, dottore." Caruso lifted the left eyelid. The conjunctiva was injected with blood, but beneath the lower lid, trapped against the eyeball, was a single grain of gold. A tiny flake no larger than a pinhead. "He opened his eyes under the water," Caruso said softly. "The gold was in the demijohn, loose among the coins. It entered with the water and lodged there. A message, perhaps." "Or a signature," Poirot murmured. He stood in silence for a long moment, gazing at the ruined face of the old smuggler. Giovanni de Luca had gone to his death clutching proof of his killer's identity in both hands. The lace from Lucia's veil, and the gold she coveted. Even drowning, he had tried to speak. Poirot covered the body with the sheet. "You will preserve the lace and the hair for the questura?" "Of course." "Ben, and the gold flake?" Caruso placed it carefully in a glass vial. "Already catalogued. Evidence number 7. Poirot turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Tell me, dottore, in your opinion, could a woman alone have done this?" Caruso considered. The victim was 72, not strong. If he trusted his attacker and was taken by surprise, yes. A woman could have held him long enough, especially if a second person pinned the arms. 2 people, Poirot thought, always 2. Outside, the sun had burned away the mist. He stood on the lungomare of Salerno, watching fishing boats return with the morning catch, their holds silver with anchovies. Somewhere among those boats had once been La Sirena Azzurra, carrying 20 kilograms of imperial gold and the seeds of this murder. He took from his pocket the 2 solidi he now possessed, one from the villa floor, one from the baptismal font, and the scrap of lace from the boat. 3 pieces of the same puzzle. Lucia had torn her veil in the struggle. Giovanni had ripped away proof and carried it into death. The gold had been present at the drowning, loose coins in the demijohn, perhaps to weight it, perhaps as cruel mockery. The picture was almost complete. Only one question remained. Why had Lucia not destroyed the torn lace? Pride, panic, or the fatal arrogance of a woman who believed grief made her untouchable? Poirot slipped the evidence back into his waistcoat. The tide, he reflected, always brings the body's secrets to shore, and tonight, on the Terrace of Infinity, the final act would begin. Chapter 8. The Path of the Gods. The Sentiero degli Dei at midnight is not a path but a blade of stone suspended between heaven and the black abyss. Moonlight turns the rocks silver and the sea below into hammered pewter. Every footstep echoes like a confession. Wind screams up the gorge, carrying the scent of wild thyme and distant lightning. Hercule Poirot walked alone, cane tapping rhythmically, Homburg pulled low. He had dismissed the carabinieri escort with a quiet word. Tonight he needed the killer to feel safe enough to strike. A lamb must walk without wolves if it is to draw the tiger. Halfway between Bomerano and Nocelle, where the path narrows to the width of a coffin, a figure stepped from the shadow of an overhang. Lucia de Luca, black veil fluttering like a battle standard, a small Calabrese revolver steady in her gloved hand. "Stop there, Monsieur Poirot." He stopped. 10 meters separated them, close enough to kill, far enough that a sudden move would be suicide. "Madame," he greeted her with perfect courtesy, "you honor me with this moonlight promenade. Enough games." Her voice shook, but the gun did not. "You will leave this coast tomorrow. You will forget Giovanni, forget the gold, forget everything. Or you will fall here like so many before you." Poirot inclined his head, "And if I refuse, then the path of the gods claims another soul. They will say the great detective grew careless on a dangerous trail. Tragic, but believable." She took one step closer. The wind tore her veil away entirely. It sailed out over the void like a dark bird. "You should have left when Hale disappeared," she said. "He was greedy, expendable, but you are a nuisance." Poirot's eyes never left the revolver. "You speak of Hale as though he were already dead." "He is. The sea keeps its own." A bitter smile. "He believed I would run away with him once Giovanni was gone. Men always believe that." Behind her, 3 more figures emerged silently from the darkness. Enzo Moretti, shoulders hunched like a bull about to charge. Dr. Tristan Hale, soaked to the skin, seaweed in his hair, very much alive and holding a dive knife. And, most surprising of all, Padre Matteo, pale as parchment, a heavy old Lamar pistol trembling in his arthritic hands. 4 killers on the path. The net had not merely closed, it had become a noose. Poirot showed no fear. "Ah, the entire company assembled. How economical!" Lucia laughed, a terrible sound against the wind. "You thought it was only me? Giovanni was going to give everything to the state, then to the church. We all had reasons. Enzo his share, Hale his treasure, the padre his new orphanage. Even your precious English inspector was too late." She raised the revolver. "Goodbye, monsieur." Poirot lifted his cane and whistled. One sharp, piercing note. From both ends of the path, floodlights blazed. A dozen carabinieri in steel helmets rose from behind rocks, rifles levelled. A bullhorn crackled. Gettate le armi, mani in alto! Enzo roared and charged. A warning shot sparked off the stone at his feet. Hale dropped the knife instantly, hands high. Padre Matteo let the ancient pistol fall as though it burned him, sinking to his knees in prayer. Lucia alone did not move. For a long moment, she and Poirot stared at each other across the moonlit blade of rock, the revolver steady. "Drop it, madame," Poirot said quietly. "It is finished." Slowly, deliberately, she smiled. "Is it?" She turned the revolver not toward the police, but toward her own temple. Poirot took one swift step forward. "No!" The shot cracked like the end of the world. But the bullet spun harmlessly into the night. Inspector Daphne Vale, moving with the speed of a leopard, had struck Lucia's wrist from behind with a walking stick. The revolver clattered away into the void. Lucia screamed, rage, despair, defeat, as the carabinieri swarmed forward. Handcuffs clicked like final punctuation. Poirot retrieved his cane, breathing only slightly faster. "You cut it fine, Inspector." Daphne Vale holstered her own weapon beneath her jacket. "I was tracking Hale. When he surfaced alive near Priano, I knew the trap was still open. Your whistle was the signal we arranged." She looked at Lucia, now on her knees. Black hair unbound, face streaked with tears that had finally come. "You planned it perfectly," Daphne said almost with admiration. "The baptismal font, the mountain water, Enzo's cap, Hale's demijohns, even the priest's guilt. All to share the blame if the gold ever surfaced." Lucia lifted her head. The wind whipped her hair across eyes that no longer pretended grief. "Giovanni wanted to die clean," she spat. "I gave him water instead of wine. Fitting, don't you think?" Poirot regarded her with genuine sadness. "You gave him betrayal, madame. The rest was merely method." Far below, the first lights of dawn touched the sea. The path of the gods had kept its name intact. No new soul fed to the abyss tonight. As the prisoners were led away, Lucia between two carabinieri, head high, Enzo cursing, Hale silent, the old priest weeping, Poirot stood alone a moment longer. He opened his hand. In it lay the torn scrap of black lace Giovanni had carried into death. The tide at last had turned. Chapter 9. The Final Gathering. The Terrace of Infinity at the Villa Timbrone was never more beautiful than at midnight, when the moon hung full and low over the Gulf of Salerno, turning the sea into a floor of beaten silver, and the marble busts along the balustrade into silent judges. Torches of rosemary and pine flared in the wind. Their smoke carried the scent of ancient sacrifice. They were all present, summoned by Poirot's handwritten cards delivered at dusk. Lucia de Luca, in a simple black, prison dress wrists bound, but head unbowed. Enzo Moretti sullen between two guards. Dr. Tristan Hale shivering in a borrowed coat, seaweed still tangled in his hair. Padre Matteo frail and weeping. Inspector Daphne Vale, watchful at Poirot's side. Capitano Rossi nervous, revolver drawn but lowered. The suspects formed a half-circle before the balustrade. Beyond them, the void. Behind them, the armed carabinieri. There was nowhere left to run. Poirot stood beneath the central torch, small, immaculate, terrible in his certainty. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. "We are met one last time, not for mourning, nor for justice. Those belong to courts and to God, but for truth. Truth is the only guest I ever truly invite." He turned first to Lucia. "You, madame, discovered in January that Giovanni intended to donate the Roman gold to the nation and leave the residue of his estate to the church. 30 years of marriage, of silence, of bearing his secrets, and in return you would inherit debts and a marble plaque. Intolerable. Lucia's eyes blazed, but she said nothing. You searched for the hiding place and failed. Then, 3 weeks ago, Padre Matteo, in a moment of weakness, revealed Giovanni's change of heart. You understood that murder must come before the new will was signed. Poirot moved to Enzo. You, mon loup, were the perfect scapegoat. Everyone knew your ancient grievance. Your cap placed in the boat, your drunken alibi in Salerno contradicted by forged bus tickets. Very clever, Dr. Hale. Hale flinched. You supplied the scientific knowledge, Poirot continued. The demijohns of mountain water, the promise of escape to South America with Lucia and half the gold. You believed her. Hale's laugh was bitter. I still do. Poirot ignored him and faced the priest. And you, Padre, lent the baptismal font itself as the instrument of death. Holy water replaced by mountain spring, murder beneath the sorrowful eyes of the Madonna. You convinced yourself it was for the children's orphanage, a small sin for a greater good. The old man sank to his knees, rosary clicking. Forgive me, forgive me. Poirot's voice softened, but only slightly. Giovanni was brought to the baptistery after dark on the 15th, under pretext of final confession. Lucia embraced him. One last time, she said. You, Dr. Hale, held his arms from behind. Enzo waited outside with the boat. When Giovanni understood, he fought. He tore Lucia's veil. He opened his eyes beneath the water and saw the loose gold coins you had mockingly added to the demijohn. One flake lodged beneath his eyelid. Another he clutched with the lace. Poirot produced the evidence in small glass vials, holding them to the torchlight. Even drowning, Giovanni accused you. Lucia spoke at last, voice raw. He wanted to die clean. I gave him water instead of blood. It was merciful. Merciful? Poirot's tone cut like a scalpel. You returned the body to La Sirena Azzurra while the tide was still ebbing, so the bilge remained dry and the scent of mountain spring lingered. You placed Enzo's cap. You left one gold coin in the font as your signature. Arrogance, madam. Always arrogance. He turned to the assembly. But you made one fatal error. You believed grief would protect you. You wore your widowhood like armor. Yet grief has a scent, and yours was missing. Lucia lunged suddenly, impossibly fast, snatching the revolver from Rossi's holster. For a heartbeat, the terrace froze. Inspector Vale moved first, striking the weapon upward. The shot shattered a marble urn. Fragments rained like hail. Lucia fought like a cornered panther, screaming in Italian too ancient for translation. It took 3 carabinieri to subdue her. When the handcuffs closed again, she sagged, suddenly small. Poirot looked at her with something close to pity. You planned everything except the tide, madame, and the tide, like truth, always returns. He gestured to the guards. Take them away. As Lucia was led past him, she paused. The gold, she whispered. You will never find it. Poirot smiled, the smallest, saddest smile. On the contrary, madame, I found it this afternoon. He produced a final solidus, shining new in the torchlight. It was exactly where Giovanni hid it, in 1922, inside the hollow marble statue of Poseidon that has stood in these gardens for 400 years, facing the sea he both loved and feared. 20 kilograms, beautifully preserved. It will go to the museum, anonymously, as he wished. Lucia stared at the coin, then at the dark sea beyond the balustrade. For the first time, genuine tears filled her eyes. Giovanni always said the sea would keep his secret, she said brokenly. He was wrong. The sea gave him back, and it gave me to you. She was led away. Enzo followed, head down. Hale cursed softly in English. Only Padre Matteo paused to kiss Poirot's hand, whispering thanks for a mercy Poirot had not intended. When the terrace was empty save for the torches and the moon, Inspector Vale lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. You let her believe she had won until the very end. Fear clarifies the soul, Inspector, and tonight 4 souls needed clarity. He looked out over the gulf, where the first pale line of dawn already touched the horizon. The tide of lies has gone out at last. Chapter 10. The tide goes out. Dawn over the Amalfi coast is rarely gentle. On this April morning in 1936 it arrived like a verdict. A blade of rose and gold slicing the sea from horizon to cliff, turning every wave into hammered copper and every whitewashed house into a small, astonished chapel. The air smelled of salt, lemon blossom, and the particular sweetness that follows a storm that has washed even the memory of sin from the stones. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the foghorn terrace of the Grand Hotel Vittoria, a cup of thick chocolate cooling between his gloved hands. He wore the same dove-grey suit in which he had arrived 5 days earlier, now immaculately pressed, as though the chaos of murder and moonlight had never touched him. Only his eyes, those bright green eyes, carried the faint weariness of a man who has looked too deeply into the hearts of others and found them wanting. Capitano Rossi approached across the terrazzo, hat in hand, the gold braid on his uniform catching the first rays like a repentant sinner. "Signor Poirot," he began, voice hushed with awe, "it is finished. Lucia de Luca has signed a full confession. Hale and Enzo are talking over each other to save their necks. Even the old priest has asked to be unfrocked. He says he can no longer bear the weight of the host after what he allowed in the baptistry." Poirot sipped his chocolate. "And the gold? Exactly where you said. Inside the Poseidon, 20 kilograms, wrapped in oilskin and lead. The museum in Naples is sending a cruiser this afternoon. They wish to name a wing after you." Poirot waved the honour away with a delicate shudder. "Names on walls, mon capitaine, belong to the dead or the vain. I prefer anonymity and croissants." Rossi hesitated. "There is one thing I still do not understand. The widow, Lucia, why did she leave the coin in the baptismal font? Why give herself away?" Poirot gazed out over the gulf where the fishing boats were already spreading their wings of lateen sail. "Because, in the end, she wished to be caught. Giovanni had chosen to die clean. She could not bear that he should be remembered as the saint while she remained the sinner. The coin was her confession, silent, proud Italian. She trusted that no one on this coast would ever truly read it." He set the cup down. "Love and hate are the same tide, Capitano. Only the direction changes." A soft footstep announced Inspector Daphne Vale. She had discarded her masculine disguise and wore a simple linen dress the colour of the sea at noon. Her hair was loose, catching the sunrise like pale fire. "I sail for England this evening," she said. "Scotland Yard is grateful, so am I." Poirot inclined his head. "You played your part admirably, Inspector. The beretta in the cave, most convincing." She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "I almost believed it myself. For a moment, I thought you really were going to let Lucia shoot herself on the path." "Never," Poirot replied. "Hercule Poirot does not permit suicide. It is so untidy, and the dead cannot be questioned." They stood in silence a moment, watching a boat, La Sirena Azzurra, newly painted and renamed Santa Lucia in ironic penance, glide across the mirror-calm water. "I will miss this coast," Daphne said quietly. "In England the light is softer, but it never forgives. Italy forgives everything," Poirot answered, "which is why it must be watched so carefully." Rossi cleared his throat. The Prefettura offers you a motor launch to Naples, signor. First class on the Rome-Paris Express. All expenses. Poirot raised a hand. I have already engaged a boat. A simple fishing caïque. I wish to leave as Giovanni arrived, with the wind and the gulls and no fuss. He turned to them both, the little Belgian suddenly solemn. One last thing. The statue of Poseidon, when the gold is removed, have it turned 3 degrees to the left. Giovanni always meant it to face the exact spot where he first brought the treasure ashore. Let it face the truth now, instead of the lie. Rossi saluted, eyes suspiciously bright. Daphne offered her hand, English fashion firm and brief. Until the next impossible murder, Monsieur Poirot. May it be a very long time, Inspector. An hour later, the cake cast off from the marina of Amalfi. Poirot sat in the stern, Homburg exchanged for a fisherman's cap against the spray, watching the coast recede. Ravello dwindled to a handful of glittering windows. The Villa Timbrone became a white bird poised on the cliff. The path of the gods faded into legend. As Capri rose ahead like a sleeping lion, the church bells of every village along the shore began to ring, not the slow toll for the dead, but the bright cascading peals of a feast day. Word had spread. The gold was safe, the killers taken, the old smuggler's soul finally at rest. Poirot removed the cap and let the wind disorder his magnificent moustaches for once. He smiled at the empty sea. The little grey cells, he murmured to the gulls. They are weary, but they are content. Behind him the Amalfi coast slipped away, tier upon tier of lemon terraces and ancient watchtowers, pink and gold and impossibly beautiful. The tide had gone out, and for the first time in a week it carried nothing but light.